Every once in a while, if you're lucky, you get to meet a real one. Someone with so much life experience and authenticity and wisdom that simply interacting with them changes the way that you think about your own life. To me, this is Roger Sparks. One of the most profound things that Roger said in his book, Warrior's Creed, is that the details don't matter, only the emotion does. And that's really what I'm trying to accomplish with this podcast. I want to delve deeper into topics about people and try to understand who they are and how their experiences have changed them. The experiences themselves are fine, but how does it change you as a person? And how do you feel? I feel truly grateful to have had the opportunity to sit down and chat with Roger. He's profoundly introspective, genuine, and open about his life. Here is a person that has experienced a tremendous amount of hardship and built a mindset that has allowed him to interact with the true forces of the universe in their rawest form. Through intention and resolve, Roger continually peels back the onion of his mind and dives deeper into the metaphysical space in order to drive his body, mind, and spirit to new peaks of existence. If you haven't read the book, Roger Sparks spent more than 2 decades operating at the highest level of special operations in both the Marine Corps as a reconnaissance Marine and in the Air Force as a pararescueman, also referred to as a PJ. In this podcast, we briefly speak about Operation Bulldog Bite, which was a joint U.S.-Afghan counterinsurgency mission in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, against Taliban forces that was conducted in November of 2010. It is during this operation that Roger and his team saved the lives of 4 Americans and allowed 4 casualties to be returned home to their families with honor and dignity. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and learned and felt a lot. Enjoy and feel free to post your thoughts in the comments. This is episode 2 of the Reality in Motion podcast with Roger Sparks. Well, I think for starters, first off, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but your book was amazing. It's really interesting. You've lived a really fascinating life. But I think, one of the things that I enjoyed most about the book was you started every chapter with a paragraph or line or two from the Hagakure, and I found that really interesting. I've read the Tao Te Ching, but I've never read that particular book, and I was curious, just to start off, what about the Hagakure resonated with you so deeply when you first read it? And I'm also curious, why does it continue to provide you guidance and meaning?
Yeah, I had a very, I have a very interesting friend that when we first met, he was my student in Marine reconnaissance, and so Marine recon is a bit of kind of like a cult, and I was kind of like that Tyler Durden figure of
Yeah.
kind of curating this experience to select and train would be reconnaissance and force reconnaissance Marines from the infantry. And so I took this stuff really serious, and I was always interested in how to develop discipline in the mind and how to use everything within our minds and bodies to affect reality, to affect situations. And so, uh, anyway, again, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes without you kind of directing me, but I had a friend, his name was Rudy Reyes. He was a student of mine, and he was quite a colorful character, and he knew quite a bit about the Hagakure, and uh, he was very into kung fu, and this is the kind of guy that uh, he was, we were all very, very fit, I mean, like beyond, someone just being in shape at a gym, people were, developing themselves mentally, physically, and spiritually to be like this instrument of ultimate reality in these harsh environments of combat. And so, Rudy was a special person. He was a special student of mine. And he just offered it to me one day. So he's like, Raj, have you ever heard of the Hagakure? I think you would really enjoy this. And so he gave me a copy. And I think what was so profound about it is, to read something that was written in the 16th and 17th century that still held up. I mean, there were, analogies or metaphoric kind of proverbial quotes in this book, but they resonated today. And I thought that if something holds up that test of, just time, that there was something really profound in it. And so basically the Hagakure, like if you were to translate even the term Hagakure means beneath the fallen leaves. And so it's like
Mm.
what that directly translates into is like the hidden things of your efforts, and so when you look at Japanese Bushido culture, they believe warriors are like as beautiful and as fleeting as the sakura or the blooming cherry blossoms. And so this is just ultimate warrior poet stuff, it really turned me on in like every cellular sense that it could be. That it just spoke to me that these things that were written, centuries ago still resonate just as powerfully today. And uh, they were really simple, again, metaphoric, almost like proverbial quotes that were
Mm.
just very powerful. And so it was this deeply affirming moment to anytime that I pull that out and read it. And so I kind of leaned on that throughout my career from the point that it was introduced to me to the point that, I did an entire, 25 plus years in special operations. Uh, it would just, it was kind of like a dear mentor that like every night, every moment that I had reading these different passages, they
Mm.
became something that I could lean on, something that was bona fide. Uh, I did experience a lot of very surreal circumstances, not only in my life, but in my military career. And I couldn't find anything else that could mentor me through these situations. And the Hagakure did it. It just happened to be Japanese Bushido culture poetry, but it was something that I think in its dichotomy, in how beautiful it was and how bona fide the text was, that it grounded me and it gave me courage and resolve when I needed it, and throughout my career, I tried to turn a lot of guys onto this stuff. And when I
Nice.
wrote the book, when I wrote the book, it just made sense to use that. And I've got an interesting way about me. I tend to, you know, uh, I try to carry myself somewhat poetically. And what I mean by that is I've never, I've never, wanted to do something that was just an ego stroke. So when I got involved in my draw to the military and my draw to special operations was because I knew I could grow mentally, physically, and spiritually in that environment. And I wanted to use it. I didn't want it to use me. And so I kind of sought that environment to develop myself as almost like a meditation to understand the harsh realities of life. It wasn't political, it wasn't patriotic, it was more of like a meditation of I want to get involved in this very rigid, disciplined organization as a means to experience the full gamut of human emotions and experiences and try to learn from them.
Wow.
And that's a very naive thing to say, but because what ends up happening when you experience combat and projecting violence or trying to salvage life, you get overwhelmed with grief. Uh, but again, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes without you kind of
No,
directing me, Jack. But
that's
yeah,
great.
the hug, yeah, yeah.
I love it. That's amazing. And I'll just piggyback on that. I'm gonna come back to your childhood because that's an important place to to meditate on for a sec. But I just because you brought it up, I mean, I think one of the most interesting and kind of inspiring parts of reading the book was how you kind of when you became a recon instructor, you created your own uh, course and kind of teaching style per se. And I really liked how you touched on it. You touched on it a second ago, but like how you viewed exercise in all the regimen associated with what you guys were doing, all the tests with developing yourself, spiritually. Like the body is a mechanism to like explore the mind and develop the mind. I thought that was amazing, and I'm kind of curious if you mentioned some of the stuff that you did in the book with the water in the mouth and chicken bones, but I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about that and how you thought about you know thought about it initially and how you developed that over time.
Yeah, I don't think that I can really answer that question without getting into my upbringing and my past. You know, I mean, I grew up.
Yeah.
Any of us in the way that we grew up, you're very insulated because everything, all the nuances of how we were raised, they fall short on us. It's just reality. You're just kind of in this way, this style, this kind of environment. You know, it's like when you plant, a small little sapling, or you plant, a delicate, you know, uh, flower in the soil. Like it's that soil kind of directly affects the plant. Directly affects the growth. And um, my environment was kind of odd in the way that my father was a biker, and many of the men that helped raise me were combat veterans from Vietnam. And I grew up in a really open household. My parents knew how to have a good time. And I think through that, I had a very skewed sense of right and wrong. Like all of these men, and just this environment that I was in was very disenchanted through the 60s, 70s, and 80s of, like there's no trust in the government. They're all lying to us. And it's almost funny when you look at it now how manipulative these systems actually are. Whenever we look at COVID, we look at all this stuff, but it was just very apparent from the get go that what makes someone good or bad is really just point of view, and you have to use the things around you to as stepping stones to move in the direction that you find virtue. But so these guys, they were drafted into Vietnam, and they experienced the horrors and the confusion of that conflict, only to come home and be very disenchanted from what they understand as, like Joseph Campbell talks about, the hero's journey. It's like they survived these horrors, but it was like they were just being manipulated in this weird post-communistic patriotism thing of what the entire experience of Vietnam. And so they came back and they were like, screw the military, screw the government, screw the things that we think are right or wrong. The only thing that of certainty is the brotherhood of the reality of sharing those experiences with other human beings, and making good on that, being a pirate, and let's make sure we get ours. And just a further kind of caveat on that is just
Yeah.
I grew up racing dirt bikes. I grew up racing dirt bikes and riding to the mall, tossing my dirt bike in the ditches, and stealing Motley Crue tapes and riding my dirt bike home.
Nice.
Uh, I was tattooing all day yesterday, and I just realized what a powerful, magical childhood I had, because it wasn't free range. It was just no range. It was just Wild West. I mean, um, the things that I did in my adolescence, I mean, even when I would talk to dear friends in special operations, guys that I was sharing either Marine reconnaissance experiences with or pararescue experiences, I would tell them of my childhood, and they would just be baffled, like, just holy shit, man, the things that you did. But it fell short on me. I mean, like the way that I lived and the way that I grew up, it just, even trying to explain it now, like it was what it was. And I think the effort of me writing the book was just a memoir of trying to kind of come to grips with how surreal everything has been. Um,
Hmm.
but to kind of like focus on your question a little bit, I think one of the most interesting things that happened to me, other than my environment in which I grew up, I was injured a lot as a kid, and I had a lot of traumatic injuries from crashing dirt bikes to, I was really into racing BMX at the time, but I had a lot of angulated fractures as a kid, and
Yeah.
a lot of concussions, and it just seemed as if in one of the most interesting, I wouldn't call it injuries, but I had a tumor in my knee whenever I was 15 years old. And remember, I was having surgery for that tumor. They were going to remove it. And on the surgery, on the table, they're basically like, well, we're going to remove this tumor, but it's 50-50 that you wake up from this procedure with or without your leg. And the one thing that we can tell you for certain is you're never going to walk normal again. And they were just
This is like
trying to like set
right before you got into surgery, like when you
right,
were laying
just
down.
like as the surgeon's about to, wheel me back, and uh,
Jeez.
I'm paraphrasing a lot, but this is just to give you a
Yeah.
glimpse into, the mentality. I think that people that experience trauma or unjust
Mhm.
reality as a youth, like it becomes a strength because you realize like people's perceptions, that's all they are. And I remember whenever that surgeon told me that he wasn't the enemy, but the things that his paradigm that he was projecting onto me, it made my fists ball up. And in my mind, I was just like, fuck you, man. Like no matter what you do to me, like I'm going to overcome this. And, I had the surgery. Obviously, I woke up from the surgery. I still had my leg. And this is in the early 80s. And at that time, physical therapy was just shit. And I grew up in this really kind of hayseed town in rural Texas. And physical therapy was horrible. It was basically just a few isometric exercises here and there. At the time, they immobilized me, I think, for like 6 months in this weird splint thing with my knee. And I've always been kind of tall and lanky. And man, my leg, I mean, I was basically skin and bones. Like I had no muscle mass. I couldn't really walk without crutches. But during that attempt to recover from that procedure, I remember I got some old uh, uh, like poster boards that you get as a kid. Like everybody has these poster boards when you're doing presentations, and got out a big Sharpie and I wrote "overcome" as big as I could, and I stapled it above my bed. So at any time that I was laying there, I could just sit there and be reminded to overcome my circumstances. And that really, I mean, that experience as a young adolescent, it made me realize that, hey man, like nobody gives a fuck about you, man. Like the world is not going to help you. You have to create the reality that you want to live in, period. And that's just up to you. That has nothing to do with anybody, rubbing your feet. uh, no matter what your circumstances are, it's up to you to live the life and make the reality that you want to live. And so uh, I think from that point forward, beyond these surreal, I think the surreal circumstances of my upbringing and what I chose to do with my adult life just galvanized that. But from that point on, nothing could really hold me down. I had multiple severe injuries after that. Some of those catastrophic injuries to the same leg that I had that surgery on and I overcame. Not only the recovery process of that uh, the surgery itself, but just there was all kinds of stuff that happened to my knee. I had they had to replace my MCL with a cadaver MCL, and uh, and so the recovery process of that. I mean, I still feel that to this day. Uh, Months later, after recovering from that surgery, I fractured the patella of that same knee. I fractured the patella and severed the patellar
Oh man.
tendon of that same knee, and it just every kind of lump along the way that I took in life, it just galvanized this point of creating reality. Uh, Whenever I got into the military itself, and again, I'm paraphrasing a ton here, but getting into the military
Mm.
itself, I remember uh, to be in Marine reconnaissance, you had to go and spend time in the infantry, and so I remember checking into my infantry unit, and the platoon sergeant, despite love or hating the Marine Corps, or whatever anybody's opinions are of that's listening to this, they're a very professional organization. Despite it's a very difficult, if not impossible, place to try to have any kind of sanity or it's just impossible to maintain relationships with organizations like that. But I remember my platoon sergeant sat down and he talked to me. He's like, "So, what do you want to do in the Marine Corps?" I mean, this is like the first day that I show up to my infantry combat unit. This is early 90s. And I was like, well, I'm going to be a force reconnaissance Marine. And I remember he laughed at me because that would seem like such a crazy thing to say, that was just like a bridge too far. And it wasn't because of me physically or anything. At this point, I was very into training my body and mind. Uh, I mean, again, whenever I was recovering from that knee surgery that I mentioned earlier, I was 15 years old. I was in adolescence, going through puberty. Uh, I realized that the physical therapy program was just shit that I was going through, and it wasn't going to do anything for me. So I basically started figuring out ways that I could develop my own mind and body. I remember crutching my way to the public library and stealing every book I could on yoga or meditation and weightlifting and training. And again, in the early 80s, I mean, 70s, 80s, I mean, the way that we thought about training body and mind, I mean, this stuff was foreign concept stuff. There was nothing, there was no self-help section to any library, I mean, it was really kind of meat and potatoes, of stuff. But from that point, I mean, I was deeply into meditation and yoga. Uh, uh, when as soon as I was able to, after these injuries and surgeries, I got involved in weightlifting, and I basically found the dirtiest steroid, nasty powerlifting gym with no air conditioner in Fort Worth, Texas, as I could. And I wanted to just immerse myself in not only physicality, but what is metaphysicality? Like, at what point can you know, go beyond physical into the metaphysical? And I think that I was just attracted to that from the injustice, or the cards that I was being dealt, and getting into the Marine infantry unit. That's a very stark reality. Like, people that have not experienced being in a active duty combat unit, specifically the infantry in the Marine Corps, and to a lesser degree the Army. Like, if you have not experienced that, you have no idea what I'm talking about. I use the analogy a lot of Cool Hand Luke, which is a movie about a 50s and 60s chain gang, you know, and that's exactly what it is. The
Wow.
infantry itself is a modern day version of a chain gang. You just happen to have machine guns, and so this. I'm in now in this environment, and those environments try to take everything from you. If they take your individuality from you, and a lot of dreams die along the way. And that's what this platoon sergeant was kind of saying to me, is like, those are really nice goals that you have, but we're going to take them from you. It's like, fuck you. Like, this place is going to rob you of your dreams. And I was just, again, I just balled my fists up, and I was like, fuck you, man.
Yeah.
And so every day when I had time, I would basically train myself into exhaustion, to almost passing out, um, just doing workouts that were beyond physical, that they were mental, and uh, with I think within the next 6 months, I had, if not 6 months, within the first year that I was at that infantry unit. I mean, I feel like I became like a machine, man. I'd volunteered for a French Foreign Legion exchange, which was not a gentleman's program. We basically went to French Polynesia, and were selected and trained to become legionnaires. And so this was like their commando course that we went through. And that course is called Brevet Commando, which is in French Polynesia on Papeete in
Oh,
Tahiti.
wow.
And it sounds very exotic, but it was not a nice course to go through. Like, they were brutal with us, and uh, I found my breaking points many times throughout that. We all got dysentery. Many of the guys that I went through that program with, I think they selected out of a battalion of infantry Marines. They sent basically, I think there was like 15 of us that went, and of those 15 that went, only 5 of us graduated like this month to 3 month program. I don't even remember how long it was, but since then I have ran into people that were like, "You went through Brevet Commando?" They're like, "Holy shit, I've heard of that," and it's brutal. Uh, People that don't really understand. I know the French Foreign Legion sounds very exotic and everything, but the French government is an extremely oppressive, brutal government. The French are the ones that created the prison system, like how we put people in prisons now. The French actually invented that. In fact,
Wow.
the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam, all of those are old French penal colonies. If you want to know what the French are like, watch Papillon.
Yeah.
Watch Papillon. That's what that course was like. It was like I felt
Yeah.
like I was Papillon in a French penal colony in the 20s. That's what I
Man.
felt like I was in. And
Yeah.
but I did pass that course. I got severe dysentery. I got infested with tapeworms. It was horrific. But and I think shortly after passing that course, coming back to my infantry unit, uh, my girlfriend at the time, we had been courting each other since junior high. I proposed to her and I wanted to get married. And uh, so we had planned a marriage, but at the same time, like within the same week of me getting married to my high school sweetheart, was a Marine amphibious reconnaissance tryout in Hawaii. In Third Marines, I was stationed in Kaneohe at the time, but it's like not only getting married, but then like attempting to pass this metaphysical, shamanistic vision quest thing of becoming a reconnaissance Marine. All of those things were happening within the same week. Uh,
Wow.
but so it was real heavy, and so uh, you know we had a wonderful wedding. We went to Mardi Gras
Oh, nice.
and had like our honeymoon, but something happened, and it was like I got really horrible food poisoning.
Hmm.
The day we got married, I forget exactly what it was. It might have been something that I ate on the plane or something. I don't remember, but I got horrible food poisoning, and I lost anybody that's had really bad food poisoning, like how horrible that is. And I must have lost like 10 pounds of body weight just in throwing up. And the reason that this is of significance is within 3 days or 4 days of me being married, I had to go have my honeymoon and then go try out for Marine reconnaissance. And basically, the Marine Recon Indoc is a day long vision quest to see what kind of spirit you have. Like they want you to exceed all expectations physically and show them that you have something deep inside of you that is just indomitable. And so as I'm preparing for this moment that I've trained for years, if not my whole life, I have the worst food poisoning experience that I think anyone could have. And but hell or high water, man, I was like, I'm going to do this. And I remember, I've never been a religious person, but I'm deeply spiritual. Like I've always scoffed at religion in the aspect of Christianity or, uh, anything that's of dogma,
Yeah.
of of faith. Like I understand that people need these things, but from an early age, I realized that this is just an early form of government. When you look at like Catholicism, like that is literally just an early form of government. You're trying to basically repress people with superstitions.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think that
Exactly.
Catholicism is great, let's just talk about the Inquisition. Like it's ridiculous. And so
Yeah.
even that these things hang around, it says a lot about humanity because you know, religion is a crutch, but people are sick. People need that support. And I understand that. There's nothing wrong with needing help in life, but see it for what it is. Like it's a manipulative thing, and I'm not, believe me, like I am deeply spiritual, but I think that, to say that, there's one religion that's correct, it's just a joke. There's just no way. It's just the fact that we fight wars through religion that religions are not good things. Spirituality is a very beautiful thing, but religion is ridiculous. It's just a form of control, you know.
When
But
you say, because I think it's important to like articulate, because a lot of people say talk about spirituality, but I have, I feel the same as you, but I'm curious, like when you say spirituality, like what exactly do you mean? Can you articulate how you're interested in having spiritual experiences? You're a spiritual person. What does that mean?
yeah, my dad was a rough dude, man. You know, and a lot of his mentorship came from prison stories that he would tell me. You know, that was a lot of
Well,
my upbringing. You know, like
yeah,
very brutal prison stories. And you know, one of the things that he said to me, something was on, or maybe somebody came to the house to hand out Bibles or something, or just whatever. You know, like whatever
yeah,
experience this was. But my dad looked at me. He's like, you know, religion. You know, somehow the topic came up, and he
yeah,
was basically just, you know, it's religion is a crutch, is what he said. The analogy was like religion is a crutch. He's like, but people are sick. People need it to lean on. And just little things like little pearls like that were kind of fed to me throughout my youth. But beyond that, you know, like I realized that there was something indomitable within us. You know, that there was something inside. And I would sit, and again, this is at a young age. I mean, I'm not some prophet or anything. I don't want to start my own cult or anything. I'm not anybody special.
yeah,
I did experience a lot of weird hardships and depravity as a kid, but I mean, it's our difficulties that make us strong. And it's like, you know, without racial injustice, you wouldn't have Martin Luther King. You know, it's like, you know, all these people that we celebrate for overcoming adversity, it's like that adversity that made them strong.
yeah,
And so, like, to reflect that back on myself, I mean, I just remember from a very young age, you know, when I did grow up, there wasn't childcare. Like, if you wanted childcare, there was churches that you would go and hang out at. Churches had like these youth programs in the area that I grew up that was childcare. You know, if your parents
wow,
had to work or they weren't there, that you had to go hang out at this church. And I just remember just like seeing through it just so plainly, you know, like just looking at it and saying, well, you know, like you're saying that if I die and I do what you say to do, that I'm going to go to heaven.
yeah,
I'm like, but where did I come from before I was born? And it was just, it made me sit and think about these things a lot. And it was like, well, life, the cosmos, uh, reality, whatever we want to call this, that it's just a cosmic birth machine, right? Like me talking to you right now is just you aware of yourself. Like I am talking to you right now. Like we're just life aware of itself. You know, to get all metaphysical and heavy,
yeah,
like I am just you talking to you right now. I'm just like you. If you look outside the window and you see a tree and there's a bird out there, like that is you. Everything that you see around you is you. The only thing that separates you from reality is your ego. But your ego is just a reflexive mechanism, you know, for self-preservation. You know, like I need to take care of me. Like I need to protect me and the things that are mine. You know, that's just your ego. But I've always felt that spirituality, and so it's like there's a connectedness to everything around us, but we're not separate from it. Like you are everything that you see around you. You know, like we are God. I was listening to this really cool interview the other day, and I challenge anybody that's listening to this to try to find it. But Barry White, remember the R&B singer Barry White?
yeah.
If you don't,
Oh yeah,
he's an old R&B singer, an amazing guy, just a brick house of a man. But he's talking about he had this very controversial statement that he said. Like someone started asking him about spirituality, and I think he was
mm,
being interviewed in the '60s or something about this, and he's like. Uh, he had this childhood experience and he realized that that we are God. Like whatever you would project as God, well, that is you, that is us. You have the ability to alter reality. You have the
yeah,
ability to make life, to take life. You have all these things, whatever you think God would have. But it's like people want to not assume that responsibility. So it's like your entire circumstances, everything in your life is up to you. Like you can't blame anyone else. You have to create your own reality. And I know this goes back to what we were saying before, but uh, I think just from a young age, just all these strange, idle circumstances that I had going on, just made it very aware that we are very spiritual. I don't know what in me that has made me so sensitive to these things to think about them as much as I do. But Sade, the musician, one of her quotes is "Tenderness comes from pain," and I think that experiencing a lot of pain and a lot of not neglect. I don't want to say it in a bad way. I had a great childhood, but again, I was left to my own devices, and I think that feeling that as a child, feeling that despite how much my parents cared for me, like they can't help me, they can't save me, like I'm on my own, but like really owning and feeling that like maybe that pain is what made me so sensitive to these thoughts, to these matters of just like ruminating on spirituality and what is factual and what is fact. Like when is someone blowing smoke at me and when is it not? I became very critical of authority figures. And I think that
Yeah.
that's difficult, but joining the military, the military is an authority figure, and it's like being in the Marine Corps infantry, like that is soul crushing discipline. Like your wants, your desires, your needs are secondary to the organization, and that's why I really wanted to go into special operations, because when you become a member and a team member within these elite units, not only Marine reconnaissance, but pararescue. There's these terms in the military of tier forces, tier 1, 2, and 3, like special operations stuff. Like the more elite you become, the more you become what is valuable. And I wanted to understand, well, why is that? Like, what is that in my character or my charisma that makes me valuable to an organization? uh, or creating my own reality in that to where it creates its own currency. What is the currency as a member in an elite special operations team? What is that currency? Is it, you know, my character? And you mentioned it when we first started talking. I think the things that became really powerful, and after many surreal experiences, and when I say surreal, like I don't know how I survived certain experiences, but reflecting on these things and attempting to garner value out of these horrific circumstances that I've lived through, it really boiled down to that currency is your resolve and your intention. It's like, why do special operations troops go through such severe selection process? Why do they go through these things they'll do everything to try to make you quit. They hold these physical standards that are so high that that would be difficult from Olympians with nutrition programs and sports massage therapists and like all this bougie shit that's out there now. But under the most deprived circumstances, you have to hold those standards, and it's your resolve and your intention. Like how resolved are you to be in there in that moment? What are your intentions? Are you trying? Is it an ego dance? Are you just trying to wear
Yeah.
the T-shirt?
Yeah.
Because in moments of mortality, and when I say that, in moments of exposed mortality, when your life is threatened, that when others' lives are on the cusp, do you have very unquestionable resolve? And is your intention pure? Because that's what all of that training, all of that selection are, those two things, to find value in those two things.
Let's linger on that for a sec, because I mean we can kind of tie some of this together. Like maybe thinking about three things that are distinct in kind of the first part of your life, like the knee surgery, the tumor, encountering all of these really difficult physical issues as a 15-year-old. Like I'm curious, in that instance, what was your intention and what was your resolve to get through that? I'm also curious, how does that compare to you going through, Marine recon What was
Yeah,
your
yeah,
mindset?
and yeah, just yeah,
What were you
feel
hanging
free,
on?
Jack. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like my worst enemy, just like all of us, you know. But
All
so
good.
just keep
Yeah,
me
yeah.
on track, please. But
Yeah, of course.
and out of respect, try not to let me go too far down a rabbit hole. Keep me
Okay.
on the tracks, man, because
Yeah.
I do kind of go off a lot, you know.
No, no, no. All good.
But
I'm curious in three like you as a child overcoming your knee injury, Marine recon, and then going into pararescue. I'm kind of curious if we use the lens of resolve and intention, how did you
yeah, yeah,
experience and overcome each of those experiences?
yeah. So applying, and I've never done this, so this is kind of a fun exercise, I guess. But you
Okay,
know,
cool.
resolve and intention through my childhood. You know, as a young boy, like I really wanted the affection and the approval of my father and his dear friends. Again, and this was beyond toxic masculinity. These are bikers that are Vietnam combat veterans. You know, they don't recognize the U.S. government as a form of authority. You know, like from their experiences, and they've created their own reality to supersede that. And all of that was on the
Wow.
outside of what was legal or not legal. And so my resolve was severely tested of just, you know, just, you know, reflecting on it in this circumstances makes me think about the samurai again. So like the
Hmm.
samurai believed like the value of a human being is based off of their desperation. How desperate is a human being? Like that is equal to your value. And when they're saying
Wow.
value, they're saying your value in mortal situations. Like the more desperate you are, the more value you have in a life and death situation. Uh, and so when I apply that to myself as a young man, I had no other options. I was desperate, you know. And when I think about the military, from a young age, like I became very infatuated. I remember I had this conversation with one of my dad's dear friends, and I asked him. He was a corpsman, which is a medic, like a Marine infantry combat medic. And this guy, he had severe PTSD, and he had a lot of stuff going on. He was one of the funniest human beings I've ever met. You know, think like Robin Williams with you know wearing leather vests and pants and biker like all jacked up and stuff. You know, and very Robin Williams esque though in the fact that you know like he has a lot of pain, so he tries to make everybody laugh. But I asked him very naively. I was like, "Who are the toughest guys in the Marine Corps?" And he's like, "I'm going to tell you a story, and you're probably not going to get it, but I'm going to tell you either way because I owe you the truth." And he was like, I went to wake up a Marine recon platoon or a team, you know, to go wake them up to basically escort them outside the wire. And they were at like a forward base in Vietnam where like they kind of have a defensive perimeter that you have to kind of like walk someone out of. And these guys are going to go on their own and go and patrol for like a month out in the middle of the jungle trying to find where the NVA are. And so this is lunatic fringe dangerous stuff that they're involved in. And this guy Jack at the time, he had like a watch duty where he had to go wake these guys up, and at like 2 in the morning he was going to escort them through all the booby traps and everything to see them outside the wire. And when he walked into their tent, he says they were all sleeping on the ground. They were all sleeping on the ground, and all of their equipment was perfectly laid out on these little cots. And he's like, that is the toughest thing I've ever seen in my life. He's like, you have to understand, he's like, this was an unpopular war. People are being drafted to do this, but these guys, despite all of these circumstances, they are metaphysically, they are spiritually involved in honing their craft, that their comfort is secondary to
Wow.
their equipment that's just laying on the cot, and so that it would be out of the dirt when they put it on to take off, you know, or they could get it on that much more efficiently and go. He's like, you know, recon Marines are the toughest human beings I've ever seen in my life, and that really affected me. So I'm like, okay, that is the goal.
Yeah.
That's the bar, and again, like these men are kind of like setting these impossible standards to me. Not only my father with his bedtime prison stories that he's telling me, but these men that are telling me these things, it's like they're setting the bar extremely, extremely high. And they never were outright. It was never toxic masculinity. You know, it's like I just scoff at the state of our country and pronouns and all this stuff. And it, you know, the way that I digest it all is it shows how powerful our country is that we can have this ridiculous discourse. And I never want to take anyone's humanity from them ever. But the fact that we can make these things such a topic nowadays, it's like it shows how powerful our country is.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I think about the way that I was raised in the circumstances, it was a gift to be in such a severe environment. And it was almost like it was the perfect environment to go and perform as a special operations guy in the most dire of circumstances. It was like the greatest gift, you know, to have such a harsh upbringing, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the resolve I think came from my desperation. You know, when I think about my childhood, no one was going to help me walk again. There was no doctor that was going to help me or fix me. There was nobody that I could lean on for a wisdom perspective that could help me with my circumstances. I found, you know, I found comfort in reading esoteric yoga doctrine in books that were written in the 50s, you know.
Wow.
To read Joseph Pilates' Controlology, you know, to read books like that and understand that like I can create my reality with my mind. My mind is what creates reality. And if I structure that with discipline and I'm willing to face discomfort, I will bear fruit from this, you know. And it's like that's the only control I have in my life is to focus my mind and my body towards the outcome that I want. So it became very Buddhist in nature, like, and what I mean by that is it was me centric. Like if you want to fix the world, fix yourself. Period. I can't control what rhetoric is happening on the television, what my teachers are telling me, what, you know, blah, 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 blah. Anybody that's feeding me shit, I can't control that. But what I can't control is me. I can control the way that I think. I can control the things that I pay attention to. I can control where I put my effort. That's it. You know, and so what is my sphere of influence? Like, let's draw a circle on a piece of paper and write everything that you can control. And outside of that, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters that's outside of that circle. And so I think at a young age, I had to circle my wagons. I had to take stock of, you know, what matters. And that really took me down to the minutia, down to the bone marrow of how to make myself live the life that I want to live. And, you know, so resolve in my intentions. The intentions thing is very interesting because we all start off in any endeavor naive, right? You know, it's like, but who gives a shit about losing face or looking bad or making mistakes? Because that's the way that we learn. So make the mistakes now. Make as many mistakes as you can today because that's the way that we learn. And it really bothers me when people are timid and they don't want to make mistakes because it's like, fuck that. Like you can die tomorrow, you know, and it's like, who cares? Like none of these people that you care about what they think of you, nobody gives a shit. So it's like, make the mistakes, do the thing right now. You know, I mean, I remember being in the backyard, man, you know, and again, I'm around a bunch of bikers. I'm around a bunch of like masculine, hyper masculine men. And I'm out there doing yoga in my fucking underwear, man. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just like, you know, who cares? Like, I don't care if I look like a fool, but like I am making myself strong. This is what I know to do. I'm reading in this Vedic book that was written who knows when. And it's like sunlight, drinking water, breathing deep, and moving my body is what's going to increase vital capacity. So I need to go do these things.
Yeah.
So go fucking do them, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skinny as shit, man, but I showed up at these gyms where these guys are some of the strongest, most powerful men in the world. You know, like the gym that I was working out at is where Ronnie Coleman, you know, Mr. Universe, this is where he worked out at whenever he was a Dallas cop. You know, it's like, and I'm trying to do I'm trying to work out with these guys. I'm trying to jump in their workout sets with them. And I can't even squat my body weight. I've got a stick for a leg. I can barely walk. But all of them, when they would work out with me, were like, God damn, you got grit, boy. You got something in there.
Yeah.
And it was just like, well, yeah, that's desperation.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I've
Yeah.
got nothing. I was
Yeah.
reflecting, my wife and I grew up under very similar circumstances. And we were just talking. And I remember like my entire youth from junior high, going through high school and all that shit that we go through, I never talked to a high school counselor. There was never once where a teacher was like, well, what are you doing after high school? There was nobody. There was no safety net whatsoever. I joined,
Wow.
and so whenever I graduated high school, my father sat me down and he was like, whenever you graduate, you've got to move out because we can't afford for you to live here. And it wasn't because he didn't love me. It was like, that's the
Yeah.
facts. Move out, graduate high school, fly, like go live your life. And it
Yeah.
was like, okay, and it's like, okay, so I get it. And so immediately after high school, I joined the Marine Corps, went right in the Marine Corps because I had no other options. But at the same time, like I had turned this thing into like, well, this is going to be a spiritual journey where I become a shamanistic special forces troop that learns about myself and about, the world around me. And so
So by
I
that,
created that reality. It's not like I'm a
yeah.
pawn in the game of the Marine Corps
Yeah.
just mastering toxic masculinity. That's not, I mean, paint it however you want, but that's not what was in my mind. It's like, I'm going to use this environment to become, the alchemist of special operations. That's what I'm going to do. And I mean, I got in there and it was like boot camp was a joke. Infantry training. I think I was in the hospital multiple times. I had compound fractures of, just, fractures. I got pneumonia. It wasn't an easy way, but then I showed up and I'm like, okay, I'm here at the infantry unit. I'm making my reality. You want us to go do whatever? I'm going to do whatever. You want me to buff the hallway till 3 a.m. But after I'm done, I'm going to do calisthenics till I pass out. I started reading books on early or ancient or primitive cultures, like native cultures and what they do as rites of passage, not only in a vision
Mm.
quest sense, but also in a martial sense. And what I mean by that is how would they train? How would they pick and train their warriors? One of the things like native plains Indians in North America, they would do things where they would fill their mouth with water in the morning. The sun comes up, you fill your mouth with water. I'm going to run you all day long. And at the end of that day, I'm going to have you come back and have you spit the water out. And if you're one of the ones that can spit that water out, now I'll train you as a warrior. You can be part of the warrior class because now what you're saying to me is you have discipline. You have discipline of mind and body. Sure, you're running all day. It would be easier to swallow the water, breathe through your mouth. You drank the water, you're thirsty, all that shit, but I told you not to. And the one thing that you can't teach in people is discipline. And so I would find these little kind of breadcrumbs along the way, and
Yeah.
so when I say I would go do calisthenics till I passed out, I would fill my mouth with water, and I would do every calisthenic known to man with my mouth filled with water. Or when I was in the Marine Corps and we'd be going on grueling ruck marches with heavy loads, I would fill my mouth with water the whole day. So it's like I'm practicing what I'm preaching. But
Yeah.
again, I wrote down a mission statement when I joined the military, like, what am I doing? And I wrote this down, just like I wrote down that overcome whenever I was hurt as a kid. I wrote down, what do I want to gain from this experience every day? I want to grow mentally,
Wow.
physically, and spiritually. How do I do that? Okay, we're going to do a ruck march. Big fucking deal. I can carry, 100 pounds all fucking day if you want me to. That's no big deal. But that intention of why am I doing this? I'm doing this to grow mentally, physically, and spiritually. Period. So I'm using that every day. And so anytime that I have any free time, I'm like, well, how can I, kind of make this better? How can I make this more profound for me? If we ruck, we stop for 10 minutes every hour on a ruck march. How about if I sit down and I meditate? How about if I sit there and do deep breathing exercises
Shit,
when
man.
you give me
Wow.
10 minutes in between a ruck march? How about whenever I have to stand to on a force reconnaissance patrol, on alert patrol, How about I wake whenever I have to wake up as the sun rises and the sun sets? It's called EENT, ending of evening nautical twilight or beginning of evening nautical twilight. These are very important things in combat. Everybody's awake whenever the sun's coming up because that's when it's best to attack. That's whenever, people try to catch you with your pants down. So you wake up and you turn on all your senses. There's a thing in recon that we would do. It's called a SILS halt or a security halt. Stop, look, listen, smell. Stop, look, listen, smell. What is that? Those are mindfulness exercises. So I'm sitting there, and how do I tune into mindfulness exercises? I sit and I calm my breathing. I'm going to sit and calm my breathing. Now I'm going to listen. I'm going to put all of my attention on just listening to the environment around me. Do that for 5 minutes. Then switch and just smell. Smell for 5 minutes. Smell everything that I can smell. Switch off all of that and just look. Look at everything around me for 5 minutes. Notice the shapes, the textures, the movement. So go through that. So what are you doing? It's just mindfulness training. It's almost
Yeah.
like the same thing of like Shaolin monks. Like they became martial experts, but at the same time, it's why they became so good at what they did is because they're using that as a path for spirituality as well. And so I was doing that same thing within
Wow.
special operations. Uh, and just being very mindful of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
but I'm going to
that's
stop and let you regroup and I'm going to grab the water thing. It's just right out of
go
reach
for it.
here.
Go for it.
You know what's interesting, Jack? Now I'm in my 50s now,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel it, man. I really
Yeah.
feel it, man. And I mean, I'm still in really good shape. I mean, for being in my 50s and the injuries that I've overcome and the things that I've experienced in my life, like I feel like I'm a success story in that regard, but it's not enough because I think the gift of age is kind of a curse as well because in our mind we're always that thing that formed us, right? Like that young boy that had that tumor in his knee. I'm still that boy, you know.
Yeah.
And so in my old age now, whenever I have these injuries that I have, I mean, I've been paralyzed. I've had horrific orthopedic injuries that I've overcome. All these things. I mean, I feel like I've had every sports injury that someone could have in my life, and now it's becoming much more difficult to recover from those.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't, but I'm constantly trying to figure out how to solve the problem, man. It's like, is it my emotions that are causing these pains? Is there something in my personality that causes inflammatory responses? But it's difficult now because I have to accept that it's just my age. I'm aging, so
Yeah.
I can't solve problems the way I solved them with my sheer will in the past, right? Like, I can't rely on that anymore. So now I have to be a little more, kind of tactful in the way that I approach, inhibiting my body, my physical body. Like instead of going on like 100-pound mile, like carrying 100 pounds for a mile as fast as I can in the morning, how about like I do just yoga or I go on a walk and I breathe as deep as I can and I connect with the things around me. So
Mm.
it's in, and that's much of my adult life. I've used my physicality to regulate my emotions.
Yeah.
And as I age, I'm finding that gets hamstrung, that gets taken away from you. So you have to regulate your emotions through deep meditative practice of just sitting with them and being uncomfortable with what you're
Yeah.
feeling. And that's part of me maturing, and that's part of me, the gift of age, it forces you to change your paradigm, and that's kind of where I'm at
Yeah.
now.
You're evolving again. That's amazing. And what I definitely want to talk more about that. I want to get into now, your transition to becoming a PJ. So I'm curious, initially why. I mean, you spent many years as a Shaolin monk Marine, at the highest level, honing your craft as an instructor. Why did you decide to transition into pararescue, and also, thinking about this through the lens of intention and resolve, I mean, what was drawing you and driving you towards that, and through those,
Yeah,
the
this has
difficulty
been
of
an
a
interesting topic. I
Mhm.
mentioned one of my mentors. There's a tattoo artist by the name of Scott Campbell,
Yeah.
and him and I just had a very deep conversation about this stuff because he's one of the most insightful human beings I've ever shared space with.
Wow.
And again, artists are sensitive, right? And so it's interesting to kind of share traits with other people when you see
Yeah.
something that you value in someone else. It's generally you're just affirming that in to have that friendship with them, and that's very much so the case with my friend Scott. But he brought up that same question, Jack, of like, well, why did you go from force recon to you know pararescue? uh, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I could give you like these war stories, I could give you these things, but it was there's a lot of little things, man. There's a lot of
Mm.
things that just kind of added up, and I've always been very cautious in status quo, in becoming stagnant, and I think one of the greatest things that I could share with the audience if they really want to write something down about what I say, I think is beware of comfort. Like
Mm.
I think that when we do something for so long that our ego and who we are becomes very comfortable, even if it's something as challenging as having a career in special operations. Like at the time that I chose to stop being a reconnaissance Marine, I feel like I had done it all, man. And I realized at that moment within the Marine Corps, if you keep sticking around, uh, you have to drink the proverbial Kool-Aid, of the organization. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to try to just tell people how to do things. I didn't want to just hold a clipboard the whole time. And if you stay in the Marine Corps over 12 years, like you quickly become the guy that just tells people to do things. And I didn't want to do
Gotcha.
that. And so, at the same time though, I kind of evolved past the point of trying to be a tough guy. Like, I mean, there's only so much tough guy shit you can do where you're like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And you see a lot of guys do this stuff, and I was like, well, there's tenets in Buddhism. Like out of all the religions, out of the organized religions that are out there, I think Buddhism kind of has it best. And the reason being is like you need to work on yourself. Like again, if you want to fix the world, fix yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
there's some there's timeless wisdom in that, where others are like, hey, like do what I say and you're going to go to heaven. And
Yeah.
if you just, it's all manipulative, where
Yeah.
Buddhism is not manipulative in any capacity. It's just like everything you want to experience heaven and hell, they're both here right now and they're in your mind. It's
Yeah.
like, your attachment and these tenets. And one of the tenets of Buddhism is you know to be involved in projecting violence, and the way that they word it is you shouldn't be involved in uh, weapons, like the production or the proliferation of weapons. And I think that being a force reconnaissance Marine is kind of like you're the snake eyes of the GI Joe, right? So it's like you're kind of like
Yeah.
the sexy version of combat. You're trying to romanticize combat. And I think that anybody that's experienced real combat, they don't they don't romanticize it, because in reality, using violence to solve problems, the only thing that you gain from that is grief. That's the truth of it. So it's
Wow.
when I see everybody like all this bullshit that's out there, man, on social media, all these people glorifying violence, like projecting violence, there's something that's beautiful in that of self mastery. You want to be a Navy SEAL, you want to be a PJ, you want to be a recon guy. There's a self mastery that is very profound, and I think that's why people are drawn to people like David Goggins or Jocko Willink and all these fucking people. But I think the
Yeah.
thing that they've got fucking wrong is, did you really? How are you sitting with violence? How do you sit with the violence that you've honed yourself to? You can justify it in any way that you want, but in reality, it's always better to be a warrior that's a gardener, not a gardener that's a warrior. I totally get that. And
Mm.
I think anybody that understands my past, they're not going to question my validity to project violence or to be, you know, someone who can perform at a very high caliber in that environment.
Yeah.
But the thing is like how, just like you mentioned before, how has that changed you? You know what I'm saying? Like the thing
Yeah,
that all of
exactly.
these fucking podcasts and social media bullshit and movies and fucking uh TV series, all this stuff, this John Wick fucking bullshit,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
how has that changed that? Ask someone who has been a professional fucking warrior, how does that felt to kill someone? How has that felt to brutalize another population? How has that felt? Either and if they have some kind of bullshit comeback, either they haven't felt it or they just haven't moved past it. They're not willing to feel the things that they've experienced. And I think that we owe it to ourselves. Like, again, that comes back to that resolve and that intention. You know, that intention must be self mastery at the sake of your ego. So if you're experiencing things and you sit with the aftermath of things, how have they changed you is the real question. What do you take with you and what do you leave behind? And I think those are the real powerful questions. They did a program in Vietnam, uh, and this program was a mindfulness thing. There's a beautiful book that was written about it. It's called In Search of the Warrior Spirit,
Hmm.
and the author, I think, was Richard Strozzi Heckler. But basically, they had this program that they wanted to teach mindfulness techniques to the Green Berets. And at the time, special operations was a relatively new concept. And to ad lib the book, to really boil it down to the point that I'm trying to make, they found the more that they taught meditative disciplines to special operations troops, and at the time, the Green Berets were a very new thing, organized troops that were specifically trained and selected to do covert operations, or to act independently of direct leadership. When you teach people like this meditative disciplines, they become very nonviolent. They
Mm.
become they become strangely so. And so one of the stories in this book is of a LERP team, or like a reconnaissance team, captured an NVA scout. And so basically they caught a version of themselves that was the enemy. Like they
Oh.
basically caught a special forces reconnaissance troop. And whenever you capture people like that in these circumstances, you do a field interrogation, which is you torture them. You torture them and you kill them. And so they're in the this now. These are Green Berets that were uh, trained in these meditative disciplines
Mm.
of attempting to regulate their brainwave states or their temperature, or through visualization, create more endurance or power out of their physical bodies. And so this was a government program to teach them this stuff. And so these guys were in Vietnam. They captured this scout, and they're doing a field interrogation, i.e., torturing this young NVA scout, who is basically just an enemy version of themselves. And they're going through this guy's rucksack, and they're doing horrible things to this guy, and they're about to kill him. And they dump out this guy's knapsack. And one of the things they find is a toothbrush that's been cut down to the nub. And it's interesting, anybody that's been in any special operations unit, you get so fanatical about the things that you carry, you trim the weight down by cutting your toothbrush down to nothing. And so what they found is, even in that severe dichotomy of us and them, of good and bad, they had more in common with the person that they were brutalizing than any other person in the world. The things that they were fighting for.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting, It's like, to use that story, I
It's
think
wild.
that the greater question is really, how are your experiences changing you? At what point do your experiences surpass your resolve and your intention? because when they do, that's the point of growth. That is the point of discomfort. There's a huge thing within our culture, and when I say culture, I mean Western culture. There's a huge lie that comfort is success. It's just the opposite. The more uncomfortable. Think
Yeah.
of like any moment in your life that was uncomfortable. That's where you were growing. And so to think that comfort, to living lavishly, to living to where we're constantly comfortable, that is a lie. Like comfort has nothing to do with success. If it's a byproduct of it, well, then that's decay. That's not success, that's decay. So be very aware of that. Like in your day, like think of like, well, why am I comfortable? How am I comfortable? Like what was the catalyst to this comfort and how can I become uncomfortable in a healthy way? The more we become uncomfortable in our relationships with ourselves and with other people, that increases value or meaning to that relationship. It's not comfort. It's like, again, it's like, if you want comfort, that leads to excess, that leads to
Mm.
decay. That's the problems that we have in Western culture is abundance and comfort.
Yeah.
It's like it's your deprived, it's the things that you're deprived of that you value, that you cherish, that you're grateful for. And so it's like be mindful of that, like hold that sacred, and so I mean I know that we kind of got off topic, of talking about like, well, what made me change from a reconnaissance Marine to a pararescue. I mean, I was comfortable, man. I was
Mm.
way too comfortable. I mean, I could have shot one of my own dudes and they would have blamed themselves, and
Wow.
I do have a Jim Jones way about me. I can talk. I am loquacious in the way that I can say things, but I think it's just because I can cut things down to the fucking bone, man. I have felt the shit that you need to feel. If you want to grow, man, I'm right here with you, man. I'm no different than you. And I love thinking about this stuff. I love talking about it. It's
Yeah.
validating for me to talk about these experiences with other people, you know. But
Yeah.
I was really comfortable, man. And then at the same time, I realized if I do love special operations, I love the medium of a Tuesday night halo jump. I'm standing at 20,000 feet with 100 pounds strapped to me, breathing oxygen, and I'm going to go jump and land on a 10 by 10-foot square below me. I do love those surreal circumstances. And I want to keep doing this. I think I have more to grow. I have a lot more to grow as a human being. And at the same time, I have the very real thing of like, I want to retire from the military. And
Yeah.
so I chose pararescue. How about doing something virtuous? Like my entire fucking job is to risk my life, to risk my mortality in the most extreme way possible to save someone else's. And I think
It's
that's why I wanted to go into pararescue. Like I wanted, and in some way, and this is me being on the other end of this, Jack. Like
mm.
I think that we have to save others to save ourselves. And I think that was a big part of a very subconscious draw to being the most elite professional, rescuer in the world. Like I was attempting to save myself from my experiences, and I think that we all do that in some capacity.
Save yourself from the experiences that you had as a Marine recon person.
From a baby to,
Yeah.
current decision, so it's, I think that, in Japanese culture, there's a term for that. And that
Mm.
term is a bodhisattva.
Mm.
A bodhisattva is someone who basically stops their growth, their spiritual path to help others come along. That's what a bodhisattva means. When they talk bodhi or bodhidharma, bodhisattva is basically someone who physically stops walking their path to help others. And I think that's
That's
important
amazing.
for everybody. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
very important. Even the term, that silly movie Point Break, with Patrick Swayze, like the reason he's called Bodhi is because he is basically teaching others in
Ah,
his way. That's where Bodhi comes from.
that's
But
funny.
uh, yeah, it's all interesting stuff, and it's what's powerful is when things reflect back to me, like reality reflects back to me that I'm not fucking crazy, like I'm not making all this shit up, like that it
Hmm.
does reflect itself. Like life feeds on life, feeds on life, reflects life, reflects life, reflects life. And to live the life that I have and to feel grateful and all those cliche things that I could say right now, uh, it doesn't take it away, man. When I wake up, it's hard for me to, my body hurts. I say
Yeah.
my body hurts. I've got two boys. My wife and I are still married. We've been married 30 years. I've got two sons. My older son just got out of the Marine Corps infantry. I talked him into doing that. Uh,
Oh.
he fucking hated it, but it's like,
Hmm.
we try to turn our kids into us. For all the listeners out there that have families and
Yeah.
that have children, like, that's just part of life. Like, we try to turn them into who we are, but they're not. They're never going to be you. They have their own experiences. But the reason I was bringing up my family is my youngest son, Oz. He's got cerebral palsy. Also got type 1 diabetes. He's nonverbal. When he was 4 months old, I suffered from a horrific parachuting accident where I was paralyzed. And we went to wake him up from a nap shortly after I had spinal surgery. And we went to wake him up from the nap, and he was not breathing, no pulse. And I ended up doing CPR on him for 20 minutes. And so he's got an anoxic brain injury. He's 20 years old. Anybody that wants to learn about Oz, just look at my social media page on Instagram, and you'll learn a lot about Oz. Uh, and when you want to learn about that quote that I said, you have to heal others to heal yourself. It's like, spend some time around, young kids with disabilities, man, and you'll find your
Yeah.
humanity really quick. You know, uh, it's like Oz is definitely the center of my life and my family's life, and I feel it's my job to give him a wonderful, powerful reality. And Oz is an accomplished athlete. I'm working on a full Irizumi Japanese style bodysuit of tattooing. I'm also a tattoo artist. I've tattooing him
Oh
head
yeah.
to toe, and
Nice.
he's a power lifter. He's an endurance athlete, but he is nonverbal. And he is
Hmm.
going to rely on us the rest of my mortal life. He's
Yeah.
he's gonna he's gonna he's gonna live with us, and so uh, life is unjust, man. Life is not peaches and fucking cream, man. But it's those difficulties that give it meaning. You know,
Hmm.
uh, and we all have to figure that out. And you have to stop with your fucking excuses, man. It's like, you're the only one that can fix your circumstances. The minute you start relying on someone else, the minute it's going to fucking fail, or the minute that you're shortcoming your story, your own power. You have the power to change everything in your life, but you have to have the courage to do so. And when you have the courage to do that, that's when synchronicity or grace comes into your life. Is when you have the courage to face the fucking music. In Zen Buddhism, they have a quote: "It's jump and the net appears."
Hmm.
That's just another way of saying, like, live with courage, face the
Yeah.
wind, and grace appears. God appears from a Christian context, or um, synchronicity. I tell you what, man, the last 15 years of my life, I have been fucking haunted with ineffable moments. Of moments that you cannot explain. They're just strange circumstances that there's a word: ineffable. There's no words that you can't describe it. It's just shit just happens. And that shit is spooky to me. But when those things do happen, right? Like, when those things happen, do you have the courage? Are you desperate enough to act on those things? To act on those vectors of your life? Are you willing to sell the sheep? To use an alchemist quote,
Yeah.
are you willing to give everything up in your life to step onto the path? Because everybody's talk is fucking cheap, man. Talk is cheap. Are you willing to give it up? Are you willing to step off of the cliff without a net? But as soon as you do it, man, your life's going to get better. Because it's like life is not meant to be comfortable or safe. It's meant to, you know, broken bones are going to happen, man. Horrific, you're going to feel horrific pain and loneliness. You're going to feel those things, but embrace it, man, because that's the growth. That's that good shit, man.
Yeah.
When you're experiencing it, man. I mean, I mean, the things that I've experienced, I've been broken by grief. I've spent a lot of time at inpatient treatment facilities for PTSD.
Yeah.
For a very long time, I had, strong suicide ideation. And not only that, but murder suicide in my family, man. It's just like, I can talk just because I'm as real as I can. Like, I try not to run from any of the dark shit, man. That's the good stuff.
Let's linger on that for a sec. I mean, I think that's what a big portion of what I want to talk about. Let's delve into the darkness. Like, you know, I, reading the book. I mean, it seems like most of this, the most intense stuff that you've experienced in your life, not all, but like the epic is Bulldog Bite. If we were to look at Bulldog Bite, for those who haven't read the book, like, please read the book. It's amazing. It goes over all of the details of Bulldog Bite and just how nuts the entire operation was. But if we're to look at Bulldog Bite from the lens of grief and trauma, where does inside of Bulldog Bite, where does all of that grief and trauma come from?
It's a pretty insightful question, man. I think that when we're exposed to life and death situations, the grief and trauma comes from what we are harboring inside of ourselves. I mentioned earlier that I've done CPR on my 4-month-old son.
Yeah.
I think anytime that we experience life at the cusp of mortality, at moments that can create life and death, those moments affect our subconscious in very profound ways. And when those happen, basically your hard drive, to use a kind of a dorky term of like computer science, like,
Yeah.
our hard drives, our subconscious record those moments. Those are
Mm-hmm.
deeply imprinted into our psyche when those events happen. And up to Bulldog Bite, I have many of these horrific circumstances, just to use the analogy of doing CPR on my son. Like, the subconscious is a very dark, murky thing. And there's a lot of things with EMDR therapy, with psychedelics, with meditation, with any trance state, any kind of sound baths, any weird metaphysical stuff that you can do to tap into your subconscious. It's a very interesting thing, and I was involved in understanding my subconscious from a performance standard throughout my whole life, of like doing deep visualization to attempt to manage these spaces at the edge of my physiology. So I wasn't distant from these things, but Bulldog Bite was more than I think that anyone could imagine, to experience that. It's one thing to talk or to see things on movies, to think about how things are going to be, when in reality, combat is unexplainable. I think that, and that's a timeless thing. It's things that have given me comfort from my combat experiences is reading World War One trench warfare, uh, diary entries,
Wow.
to read that experiencing horrific trauma from combat is it's a human thing. It's a
Yeah.
human thing. I think that when, again, I talked earlier, when our resolve and our intentions are brought to the breaking point, that's where trauma begins, right? Like that's where it happens. And unfortunately, performance has nothing to do with health. And the bulk of my adult life, I've done everything in my power to increase my performance. And to use an analogy of like a major league pitcher, like let's take a major league pitcher that can throw a fastball that's over 100 mile per hour fastball. Anybody that's ever witnessed that is very, very impressive. Like if you have you ever stood next to in the like right next to the dugout and watched a pitcher throw 100 mile per hour fastball right there? If you watch it, that's incredibly moving physically. Like you're like, that is incredible to see that. But if you were to take an exercise physiologist and they were to like just look at that pitcher's shoulder, like their physical system in the shoulder, they're like, that ain't healthy. Like that is incredibly unhealthy to be able to do that, because you have to have imbalance to allow performance.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I believe strongly in, and I'm going to have to go down this rabbit hole until you pull me off of this, Jack, is
Let's do it.
my generation of warfighters, special operations, career special operations warfighters that fought the entirety of Afghanistan and Iraq. Within the history of humankind, no one has ever projected violence or normalized violence in the capacity that we have in entire human history. And if there has been any of the listeners that are out there listening, correct me. Like, let's see, leave some comments. Please get in contact with me and straighten me out. When you look at all of the horrific things in, modern warfare, the way that we project modern warfare, the guys that were drafted in Vietnam, even when we look at World War One, those guys did not experience that shit for 20 years at the level that we did. Uh, sure, the body count, the horrors, the human toll was much greater than what we experienced. But normalizing and projecting violence at the highest levels of human performance for 20 years, nobody has ever done that as myself and my peers have done. And when you understand the capacity of that we even have our own performance psychologists, physical therapists that keep us performing at that level. And I was in the military over 25 years. What are they doing? They're attempting to keep us performing at that high level. But whenever you look at that, and to use that analogy of that pitcher in that shoulder socket, we are not healthy. To be able to do that, it's in Zen Buddhism, they have an analogy or a metaphor of like the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. And what I mean by that is it's a very sexy job. And from the outside, to see that pitcher throw that 100-mile-per-hour fastball, to see that guy that can run 6-minute miles and do 30 pull-ups with 50-pound weight vests on, to go do all these things that we're asked to normalize and do, we're also asked to completely bury our humanity and to take life, whether that's through surgical strikes where we're projecting violence in a way that is hard to imagine with modern munitions. That is not healthy. That is not healthy. There's nothing psychologically acceptable to the standards that we're living by. And to understand that your tier one special operations guy probably deployed over a dozen times to Afghanistan and Iraq. And when you do that, you're normalizing projecting violence. And so there's a lot of theories. So like in World War I, World War II, up to modern warfare, up to Vietnam, it would take a long time to travel from point A to point B, right? So like when those guys went and fought in the Battle of the Pacific, or they jumped into, Europe, whenever, they stormed the beaches of Normandy, when they did these extraordinary things, for humanity's sake. When they did these things, it took them months to get to that point. And it took them months, if not years, to come back from that. Now, those experiences were very short duration, like 3 years max, not 20 years, not an entire lifetime of this experience. But they had this journey to that experience and the journey back. The entire book, the Iliad and the Odyssey is about this experience.
Yeah.
In Homer's Odyssey, he is coming back from that experience of sacking Troy, and he's trying to sail home to himself, clearing the suitors of his castle, fixing his mind. But when you look at modern warfare, you get on a commercial flight and you fly to Afghanistan. And within days, you're experiencing horrific shit or doing horrific shit to other human beings. And then you get back on the plane after a couple months and you fly back. And within days, someone's cutting you off in traffic to get into the parking spot before you are. It's like there's no insulation from those experiences. And that's what I feel very strongly about that. Again, I was raised by, Vietnam combat veterans, I empathize what they went through, and what their homecoming was horrible. What the country did to them was horrific. But what I'm saying is, and again, I did this of my own volition. Like, I was a moth to the flame. I was attracted to this. I don't want to play a fucking victim to this. I played my part in this experience.
Yeah.
But that 20-year experience that I had was very damaging. And of my experiences, Bulldog Bite was so surreal and so overwhelming. I was able to perform to a very high degree in those circumstances. Like, I performed under the most horrific circumstances I think human beings can perform in. Those men that died in my arms, those young men that performed in those circumstances with me, they performed. But after those experiences, now you have the difficulty of trying to come home to yourself, of trying to understand how those experiences changed you. And no one does that for you, man. Nobody gives a fuck. Yeah. Most of all, the military. They don't give a shit of how that changes you. All they care about is how is that affecting your performance. And what ends up happening when you survive horrific circumstances of grief, those things break you. They break your humanity. And either you can continue to be a fucking animal, a monster, and project and try to insulate yourself with that fucking acidic, carcinogenic atmosphere, or you can grow as a human being and let that change you. But the way that shit changes you is it fucking breaks you. It breaks you in ways that hurt so bad that you just want to numb every aspect to your life. And guys do that easy. They do that through drinking. Yeah. Anything, any of those ways, any of those cliche ways that you can numb yourself: drugs and alcohol, sex, anything. Your ego.
I'm curious, ego. Like when you say your mind is broken, I just want to linger on that for 1 sec. Like what does it feel like when the grief sets in? What does it feel like when you have a line in your book where you say you're sitting on and surrounded by bodies and your mind is breaking and there's like a level of exhilaration. I'm like I want to. What is it like in those moments? What does that feel like?
The period that you're talking about was after a horrific experience, but we got back into the helicopter that pulled us out, and I was sitting on dead bodies of men that died in my arms, so I mean there's a lot to unpack there, but you don't feel broken there. That's not a broken feeling there. The broken feeling is when you get back home and you're sitting on a couch with your wife and kids, and something like Forrest Gump or some shit comes on, and you cannot control your subconscious mind. And for me, that was just like this strange combat scene in Forrest Gump. I mean, how many times have you seen Forrest Gump, right? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
hundreds of times. It's just a feel good movie, man. And there's a scene in there where he's in Vietnam and it's raining, and then it stops raining, and right there a firefight starts up, and I mean, I was watching that, and that triggered this emotional experience for me that made me realize that there were things that were very, very wrong in my
Mm.
subconscious. Some things that were very undealt with in my subconscious that were to the point that I knew little of myself. Even being in the military and special operations for over 20 years, all these things, how insightful, how fucking mindful my life has been, that I knew little or nothing of myself when Forrest Gump can cause me. I
Wow.
basically started crying uncontrollably. I had to go out in the garage and I just laid in the fetal position and I cried uncontrollably for, you know, uh, uh, a period of time that it made me realize that I thought I was in control, and I thought I knew about myself, but I knew nothing of myself. I had been performing.
Mm.
I'd been performing at a very, very high standard for a very long time. And there were things in myself that I had to allow to change me. And the only way that I could allow those things to change me was to become vulnerable to feeling things.
Mm.
And the performing is not feeling. The performing is not allowing you to feel. But again, what saved me was my intention, right? My intention is not to be this fucking badass. Fuck that, you know. My intention is to grow mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I've put myself here in these circumstances. And unfortunately, now I need to feel the things that I need to feel. And that was tough. That's tough. And grief is a strange fucking monkey, man. It comes out in ways that's really slippery. And unfortunately, the military does not give a fuck about helping you. I mean, when I first went to a military shrink, uh, it was the worst fit you could ever have of any therapist patient
Mm.
relationship imaginable. And again, I think the only way that you can help other human beings is if you yourself have experienced those things. And so now I have really pigeonholed myself because I have just experienced things that a very, very small amount of human beings alive have experienced, let alone that are within my sphere of influence to help me. I mean, military shrinks. I mean, I would love to see the fucking data on this question. Like, how many military shrinks have experienced surreal hand to hand fucking combat? Shit, man. I mean, just guessing, it's got to be 0.00 fucking one of the military. And there is a significant difference between reading something, like having knowledge of something, or having wisdom of something. And the only way to truly help someone is if you have wisdom. You got to have fucking wisdom. You can't be trying to help me because you fucking read about this or you knew somebody that fucking experienced this. I need to feel from you and your humanity that you have experienced what I fucking feel. Someone, like I had a dear friend directly after my experiences, because it's again, there's no words for these things. I remember I would just stand there and look at some of my dearest friends, and just tears would start coming from my eyes, and I would just start weeping. And they can't console me. You can fucking hold me. You can tell me you're my friend, but you're not on the fucking frequency that I'm feeling these things. And you can be there as my friend. Yeah, you can. And this one friend was trying to do that for me. And he was like doing the whole Goodwill Hunting thing. Like, Raj, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, man. And I'm like, okay, I fucking feel that. I saw that movie too, you know.
Yeah.
And what was funny, this dear friend of mine, years later, like 2 or 3 years later, he was in a head-on collision with his son in the vehicle. And they had just brought this new giant fucking truck, super F550 fucking truck or whatever, head-on collision, boom, airbags deployed, roll over, fucking wreck. And he said as soon as he came to, he could hear his son crying. And my buddy started crying. And I looked at him, I was like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And it's like saying things doesn't fucking matter, man. Because when you are in traumatic situations with other people, you are involved in their death. And I don't care how you try to fucking think your way out of this. If someone is in your lap and they're begging for their fucking lives and they're ripped in half, they're missing the back of their head, or their fucking heart organs are hanging out of their body and they're begging for their fucking lives, you are implicated in their death when they die in your arms. Like you're not going to talk your way fucking out of this shit. The only way out of that is to feel that and to own it, to fucking feel that. And here's something too I would love to share with everyone is like,
yeah,
surviving horrific circumstances. These things, they don't make us special. Like, I'm not special because I survived those things. I teach, I'm involved in a lot of organizations, and one of the things that I've found a lot of catharsis from is teaching Gold Star kids how to scuba dive. And sometimes, like, our pain, like the things that we experience in our lives, like the pain that we experience, like, you want to feel special for experiencing that, and that's your ego.
Yeah.
But those things, they don't make us special. Like, my experiences, they don't make me special. But what they do to me is they make me closer to my humanity. These horrific things that we experience, they make us closer to our humanity. And I think that when those things happen, we owe it to the rest of humanity to attempt to articulate these things.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important. I think that it is very important to share our humanity and to share our pain, to attempt to articulate the things that make us human. And all of these journeys, all of these fucking crazy stories that I could get into that I've experienced, like, the story has never mattered at all. Like, the story has never mattered, but the emotions do, like the feelings do. Like, some of the things that I could suggest to someone if they've experienced horrific things, when you do share that story, don't tell me the things that happened. Tell me about how that made you feel. Because that's all that matters. The fact that you survived that, and to connect with the way that you feel with that, and to share that with other human beings is the value of those experiences, not what happened. I see it, man. I see it. I'm around a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reflect that back on you then. Like, the experiences in Bulldog Bite, the grief and trauma that you experienced, how did that, you talked about letting things change you. How did that change you, like, on an emotional level?
Yeah, it made me realize that, well, one, like, our emotions, if we don't feel our emotions, they will break us. Like, that will be the weak link in the chain. Uh, it forced me to realize whatever intangible thing that I was seeking from special operations, what I was seeking from this path in my life, I had just surpassed it. And it was a very intangible thing, but it was immediately I had surpassed what I could physically do, and that I needed to take stock of that and take that same intensity in a different direction. Whether that was a creative endeavor, that was a lot of part of the book, of me writing the book, of me getting in, becoming an artist, and attempting to reflect my humanity and the experiences of things that I've become. Like, where am I now? How has this changed me? It forced change point. I think that there's another Eastern metaphor, and it basically states that, like, when you have a green nut, like if you had a green walnut, you can't open it, you can't crack it. But if the nut is dried properly, the lightest touch opens the nut. And so Bulldog Bite, those experiences, it wasn't just a tap, it was like a fucking hammer hitting the nut. It cracked it open and made me realize that I needed to connect with my emotions and take stock of the overwhelming weight of the things that I've experienced. Like, I had to feel those. I had to find a way to feel and connect with those experiences. Um, but I mean, on the messy side of that, it broke me. I mean, it when you're dealing with subconscious trauma, it makes you suicidal because you don't think anyone understands you, and they might not. They might not understand you, but that's beside the point. The problem is no one has value in the pain of your growth other than you right there, right? Like, so
Yeah.
that's very it's very painful to set with emotions of men dying or your actions or inactions, knowing that you took life or that men died because you were inadequate. However you want to reason that, and it became a very subconscious jumble of pain because those men dying, again, subconsciously, were my son Oz, who I had done CPR on at 4 months old. It's all the same person to me. Now
Mm.
my son Oz is dying on the battlefield in these horrific nightmares that I'm having, where I'm trying to save his life, but I can't. Knowing that I'm not enough and that injustice, and cruel, horrific circumstances are taking place because of me, because I'm not enough.
Mm.
And again, you can't, that's a very painful thing to attempt to walk through or to grow from. And a lot of people just numb themselves from these experiences. Uh, we mentioned earlier, before we started recording, we were talking about, I've gotten very into psychedelic therapies, and I'm a very strong advocate of these things. And there's a term that we use when coaching people or helping people through very powerful psychedelic experiences, and it's like you have to feel it to heal it. And I think that the way that you become a full capacity human being, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, is you have to feel things at a very deep level. And you have to recognize that. You have to feel the things that are happening to you in your life. And I think that psychedelics done in the proper capacity allow that feeling to take place, you know?
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, wait, let's talk about that for a sec. Like, how were you first exposed to psychedelic therapy? Like, how exactly did that happen, and what was your kind of attitude
yeah,
towards it? And
I've never been asked that. It's pretty weird to think about.
yeah, I'm curious. What was
Yeah, I
it
grew up.
like before experience and afterwards?
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty open household. I mean, there were illicit drugs. I mentioned a little bit about my
Yeah.
childhood, but there was, illicit drugs were a normal occurrence. I mean, my dad smoked doobies like they were cigarettes. And just being around that. I mean, I've always been like, I never wanted to recreationally use drugs. Like, whenever I was a teenager, an adolescent, like, there was so much drugs. It wasn't cool to even do drugs. Like, I just
Yeah.
flew straight. I was just
Yeah.
over there doing push-ups. How come I can do 70 push-ups straight if I think about this, but I can only do 40 push-ups when I'm doing this? I was lost in that. But all of my friends, were fascinated with the rebellion of recreational drugs. I grew up around people that were, dropping acid all the time, smoking weed, underage drinking, all that stuff. It never really turned me on because I was always trying to figure out, how to, increase my vital capacity or whatever the hell, and
Yeah.
but even through, you got to understand, a 25-year career in special operations, I didn't even drink.
Wow.
I didn't even drink alcohol, you know. Uh, Later in my career, again, this is like the last few years of my career. I had a dear friend who was, struggling with substance abuse, and him and I became friends on a very deep level. But he would listen to me, and he had a way. I knew that he was having difficulties as well through his career. He was another career special operations guy, and so uh, we began, recreationally using just smoking grass, just smoking cannabis. And you gotta understand the level that I was at, man. You're pretty much a rock star, but being a pararescueman on alert in Alaska, once a week you're going to get called to halo jump into a plane crash to save a family that crashed into a mountain. And I was having severe subconscious difficulties doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
And these are after the experiences of bulldog bite. To normally, like, parachute into a plane crash that's on a small bush plane that's crashed through a frozen lake. And the distances are so vast in Alaska that plane crash happened 4 hours ago. The temperatures could be 20 below zero Fahrenheit. And I'm going to go halo jump into the plane crash to try to save lives. And this is going to be at 20 below in the middle of the night on a frozen lake. And the planes, and so you get to these survivors, and the only one is alive is a little girl, and she's sitting there holding her dead mom. And so this is a normal occurrence to me as a PJ in
Wow.
Alaska. And so to continue doing that job, I started numbing myself with smoking cannabis, and I would smoke a joint in the truck to go get on the helicopter to go perform what I was just telling you.
Damn.
And I was just attempting to numb myself. So and I don't want to advocate for psychedelics or psychotropic medications, but I feel I was attempting to perform. And it's like when you're trying to lie to yourself, it's like it's only going to go bad. That's only going to become a much worse situation the more that I try to continue performing at that level and attempt to numb myself from the humanity of these experiences.
Yeah.
It's very tough. And uh, I basically was medically retired from the military for PTSD. When I would tell, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes of stuff because it's beyond the value of this conversation. But I got involved again through synchronicity, through a lot of very virtuous people that led me to uh, a group of men that were wanting to do research and make documentaries about psychedelics and the benefit that it has on my demographic, special operations, combat guys that have PTSD that is so far off that Richter scale that I was telling you that I've normalized this shit for 20 years that they believe that it has very profound effects. And there's a very deeply therapeutic aspect to doing this stuff because things are just things, whether it's acid, ketamine, MEO, frog venom, ayahuasca, all these things, like none of them have value unless you do them with the proper intention. Remember, we talked about
Yeah.
intention and resolve. Like those two things are going to save
Absolutely.
you. So it's
Yeah.
to do those things with the right intention. I'm not trying to numb myself from something. I'm trying to feel things. That is very important. And in the psychedelic space, that's called set and setting. Like, what is the set and setting of why I'm doing this? What are my intentions? Why am I doing this? And if it's to connect my emotions, my subconscious and my conscious, that's very profound. And you
Yeah.
have to understand, my experiences are so cumulative and vast and surreal that some of these things that I've experienced are just unexplainable how I've survived them. You need to have something that's just as powerful, just as surreal on the other side of that, that can help you. One of my dear friends, a guy named Wallace J. Nichols, he wrote a book called Blue Mind, and he's a brilliant, wonderful human being, and he believes in the power of water to heal human beings. And he's a part of this organization that I'm in, where I mentioned that I teach Gold Star kids to scuba dive. It does much more than that. It's an organization called Force Blue, and that's a group of special operations divers like myself that we train to do marine conservation. And that's under that whole precept if you have to heal other things to heal yourself. If you do virtuous things, virtuous things come to you in your life. And so it's anyway, this guy, Dr. Jay Nichols, he wrote this thing called Blue Mind. And we were training for marine conservation diving. There's a lot of nuances in it. And he was asked to be part of our group. And he has a real loquacious, beautiful way of speaking. And he was talking to me, and he's like, Raj, he's like, you've experienced such awe in your life, of like traumatic, destructive awe. Like, I'm sure the listeners have experienced things where you're just in awe of. It might have been like a sunset. It might be something, if you've experienced trauma, it might be a traumatic awe, like where like you experience loss of life that's traumatic, and you're speechless from that experience. And he's like, you've experienced so much traumatic or destructive awe. We have to balance that with something that's beautiful or creative awe. You have to balance these things to get perspective. Like, if you're always just one-sided, you never have any perspective of your life. So he's like, you've experienced all this horrific destructive awe. He's like, you need to experience creative and beautiful awe to find perspective, to be able to process and metabolize these things that you have in your life. And I think that psychedelics done in the proper way, it offers that. It is the way forward with therapy for PTSD in the future. Like, I mean, I'm not inventing this shit. I'm along for the ride like everybody else, but these things have dramatic implication because of those reasons I'm explaining, because you have horrific traumatic awe, and you have creative and beautiful awe. And when you gain that, like, staying high, like there's another analogy in Eastern spirituality, is it's easy to be wise in the mountains. And what that means is, like, you can become enlightened when you're outside of your pain. So you can become very enlightened, and you'll feel good when you're on top of the mountain and you can see the vista. Like, when you climb a mountain, the whole purpose of climbing a mountain isn't to conquer the mountain. It's to gain that perspective of, now you've summited this thing of challenge, and you have this perspective from that. But you're not staying on the mountain. You're going to come down back into the valley. You're going to come, trying to use my hands here. You're going to come back down into the valley off the peak. You're going to come back down into the valley. When you come back down into the valley, what stays with you? It's the perspective of what that view looked like when you're on top of the mountain. And so when you have these psychedelic experiences, yeah, you're on the mountaintop. You're high as fuck. I mean, you're out there. But it allows you to have this perspective shift between the destructive awe and the beautiful awe that has value. And it allows you to live with these experiences, because the darker depths that you can experience, the higher highs you can experience. And it's like that is life. Like, you can't experience bliss until there's negative. It's like, it's as simple as like art. When you have something that's dark, you have light. Like, you have one without the other. but it allows you to bracket that. It allows you to gain perspective to understand I did experience these horrific lows, but that gives you the capacity to have horrific highs. Now, that is not the normal state. The goal is not to stay where I'm chipper and fucking unicorns are coming out of my asshole, and every time I speak, it's just fucking rainbows emitting from what the fuck I say. Because reality is in between those two.
Yeah.
But it's that perspective, that capacity that has value. And I think that psychedelics offer that specifically to traumatic experiences of people like myself. Like, it allows you to be gentle with yourself and gain that and feel the things that you need to feel.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think we started this whole rant on how I got involved, and man, that's a
Yeah.
whole podcast in itself, man. It really is. But
Okay.
again, synchronicity. I think
All right.
it boils down to synchronicity. You know, having the courage to face discomfort. As soon as you do that in your life, weird, synchronistic things are going to happen. And if you want to call that God, the language of God, the language of the universe, whatever the fuck you want to call it, that's how you basically create that in your life. Is you have to live with courage, real courage, and you
Let,
have to face discomfort. As soon as you do that, weird shit is going to start knocking on your door. That's just the way life is. When you face your discomfort, you become more attuned to the God that you are,
yeah.
the life aware of itself. You become in that fucking realm to where things are going to start coming to you that you can't explain. It just happens.
Let
Yeah.
let's perfect segue. I would love to talk a little bit more about some of the synchronistic experiences you've had, because the one in the book, which was one of the most absurd stories I've ever heard, was, immediately after Bulldog Bite, you basically are some guys, a tattoo artist, a filmmaker, and a lawyer, come into your base and say, "Hey, we want to make a documentary about
Yeah, man. I
tattooing
mean,
you." I
it's
mean,
just,
that's absurd.
yeah. Admin note, I've got about 15 minutes and I need to
All
bounce.
right,
Okay.
all good,
Uh,
man, all good.
and I'm
Yeah.
happy to pick it up later if you wanted to. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
But my son Oz, I've got to meet him at a gym. He's training
Yeah, all good,
powerlifting,
all
so
good.
I got. But
All right, on. Cool.
yeah, so this shit, man. So right after Bulldog Bite, when I say right after it, that was an 8-day period,
Mm.
uh, and
Oh wow, it was 8 days.
yeah, that's eight
Oh my
days. And
gosh.
so, like, we're coming from that from 8 days, and we land our helicopter at the time. Pararescue, we use whatever aircraft are available at the time in Afghanistan. We're using Pavehawk helicopters to get around. And we land, and I'm just traumatized, man. I'm covered in feces, blood, just, uh, I mean, it's been about 8 days. I've only slept like 30 minutes at a stretch. I mean, just the horrific things that we experienced over an 8-day period are hard to explain. And you're in a really fugue state. Like, I mean, you're not present, but you're not there, and it's like you're in this weird subconscious space of just kind of like a in a nightmare, but it's like you're just kind of stuck in it, and nothing is real. Nothing felt real. And we landed the helicopter. We go back and I see pictures. Now we're in our main kind of area, and it's like a controlled compound. And the helicopters are just right outside the door, but we sleep right there. And but I mean, just seeing a picture of my wife and kids, I just break down on the ground and just cry uncontrollably, like just grief. And within 30 minutes to an hour of us being in the state, we just got to knock on a door. And you got to understand, we're in a controlled compound within a compound on an airfield on a controlled base in Afghanistan. No one just knocks on your door. Like, I mean, so like, even to have someone knock on the door, you're like, what the fuck is that? Like, I think in the 6 months that we were there at that location at that time, no one had ever knocked on the damn door. And anyway, so I opened the door because, I mean, if you're there because you're there on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I opened the door, and there's 3 civilians and a public affairs officer. And I mean, like, even where we're at, like, public affairs officers aren't allowed in the compound that we're in. We're in like a task force compound that is, it's, I mean, this is not, it's the honeycomb hideout. It's the opium den. Like, you're not allowed into this area unless you have
Yeah.
fucking business there, and
Yeah.
uh, anyway, I'm standing there covered in feces and blood and literally brain shit all over me. I mean, after this 8-day just shit fest, and these guys are looking at me and I'm looking at them. They can tell I've been crying like a fucking animal. And they're like, hey, we're here to tattoo special operations guys, make a documentary about this. What do you think? And I was just like, what the fuck? It really took me. I was like, okay, man,
Yeah.
but all I thought about was like, is this good for the guys that I'm with?
Yeah.
Like, in 3 days we were going to go right back out to the same experience that we've kind of eluded
Yeah.
around this experience. But 3 days we're going to go right back out, and I'm like, this is really fucking weird, man. Like, I mean, but it was such a shot across the bow, and it was so weird. I mean, you might as well have like if these guys were aliens and they were in a UFO. Like, that's how weird it was to me. Like, I mean, I'd been in the
Yeah.
military for over 20 years, all special operations, minus 2 years of that 20 years, multiple combat deployments, multiple of weird, unexplainable shit. And I'm at a very deeply vulnerable place in my life. I feel psychically broken, but we are performing and we are not done with this deployment. Okay. So, like who the fuck are you guys and what's going on? And at the same time, I mean, I think highly emotionally intelligent people read the room well, right?
Hmm.
And these guys were highly emotionally intelligent human beings, and they're looking at me and they're just like they're taking this in. Like, I mean, I smell like fucking piss and acid, and
Yeah.
I've obviously just been crying. I've obviously got blood all over me. And these guys are then now after they gave me, they're like, what? Then they're looking at me like, oh, whoa, like, whoa, wowie. Like, now we're being confronted with our
Yeah.
reality. Like, this is a very naive concept. And all this is
Hmm.
happening within seconds of us just staring at each other. Um, there was something deep inside me that just spoke to it. It was like these guys don't know what the fuck they're asking me, but I think that what they're asking me will help us come back to ourselves a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
imagine if you literally, I just want to use this analogy. I know it's going to be very severe, but imagine if you literally just beat another human being to death with a bat. Like, if your life was threatened or your loved ones were threatened, this person was trying to kill you or your loved ones, and you beat them to fucking death with a bat or a rock, or you killed them with a fucking screwdriver with your fucking hands. Like, you just did that. Let's just say an hour of time goes by and you're sitting on their fucking body just looking at the dead body, and then someone knocks on the door and they want to tattoo you. That's exactly what fucking happened to us. And I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
because what happens is when you do that, when you're in that space, you have left your humanity. Like, you have
Yeah.
left who the fuck you are. Now, within that hour, psychologically, you're gonna start trying to come back to yourself, like
Hmm.
who you were, but everything has just fucking changed. Like, everything has just fucking shifted. You are not who you were before that
Yeah.
happened. That's what happened to us. And so it was just like, okay, like, what you're asking me is really fucking weird. You have no value to me. But what I'm going to sit here and I'm going to think, I'm like, I think that you're, what you can do is it'll help me come to myself a little bit, just to have something to just distract me from this, what thing I just fucking did. You want to tattoo me?
Yeah.
All right, sure, fucking tattoo me, man. But
Yeah.
the real powerful thing about that entire experience is when you get tattooed, you're connecting with yourself in ways that you can't perceive. It's a very subconscious thing of connecting to self. It's a ritual of self. And
Mm.
however naive that concept was, and however foolish they felt of asking me that, it was the most profound cathartic thing that you could have done to heal us at that moment.
Mm.
No psychologist, no psychiatrist, no therapist is going to fucking help us as much as those tattoos helped us.
Wow.
And so from that point forward, it was like, I have to understand this fucking voodoo.
Yeah.
You know, like I have to understand this fucking voodoo because what just happened there has taken my lifetime to experience. And there's a lot of unanswered things that just happened within that moment that it's going to take me the rest of my life to unpack. Those three men were very creatively powerful human beings. You know, the first guy is Scott Campbell, the tattoo artist.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy's a fucking
Incredible. Yeah.
shamanistic fucking creative type that anyone in the creative space uses him as a source of fucking wisdom in.
Yeah.
The guy that was making the documentary was a guy named Casey Neistat. You know, it's like, if you don't know who these people are, look them up. You know, as I'm
Yeah.
telling you this story, you know, it's like now both of these guys they were established in their own fields, but they weren't as successful as they are now. Like they were at the cusp of really breaking through the stratosphere of what success looks like in creative endeavors. Um, but again, right? So like the lesson with them, like how uncomfortable is it for them to pursue going to Afghanistan in an active fucking war zone and tattooing special forces guys that just experienced horrific combat? How comfortable is that? You want to leave New York? You want to just fucking do that? So I mean, they gave up everything to fucking do this. So
Yeah.
it's like the the the
Tremendous courage. A lot of
the, the,
courage
the
to. Yeah.
cauldron that this shit is fucking cooking in
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
pure soul
Yeah.
juice, you know. And that, but that's
Yeah.
and to their artistic credit, they did that intentionally because they knew that,
Yeah.
you know. And I've established a very long lasting and very deep friendship with these men. You know, I consider Scott one of my greatest mentors of my life. You know, I tattoo now as a profession. I travel the world and tattoo. Um, and I consider it, meeting them was one of the most powerful moments of my life, um, the most powerful change points of my life. And they know that too. They feel that as well. And so to have them reflect that with me as well is it's a deeply ineffable
Yeah.
affirming thing to me in my life, the pain that I've experienced as a human being, and to share that with them, with some of the most creative minds alive right now. You know, I mean, and for them to feel the same way and to share their worlds with me is a deeply affirming thing that you cannot explain that is that the synchronicity for these things to happen is unexplainable. It goes into metaphysics. Carl
Yeah.
Jung mentioned if you have unprocessed moments, everything will seem a synchronicity. And then think about how much unprocessed shit that I was dealing with at the
Yeah.
moment of meeting them. But tell me in a rational mind that any of that makes fucking sense. It doesn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. I mean, I owe my life and the vitality that I have in my fucking heart, spirit, and soul to those moments, to making sense, to finding value from the horrific experiences, to find a way to creatively express that, to be open and vulnerable, and to feel things. You know, just this last a year ago, almost today, uh, Scott and I, you know, did a trip to Peru to do ayahuasca together. You know,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just fucking heavy, man. You know, so it's like, you know, uh, I can't sum this up, but I'm deeply grateful, you know, for these experiences and to be able to share them, not for my own grandeur. I mean, I don't give a shit, you know. I live in a small, dumpy house in Eagle River, Alaska. I drive a shitty car. I paid $4,000 for the car I drove or that I bought over 10 years ago. I mean, it's like I live very humbly, and
Yeah.
I value my health and the people that are in my life, and the ability to feel and express things. And I just want to say thanks for letting me share stuff with you. I'm